We're still on the third generation of the major Maccabees or Hasmonean family members. I mean, the first generation, the generation that started the whole thing, with Judas Maccabeus himself and his brothers. They're all dead by this point. That second generation really just had John Hyrcanus in it. He's the only one that survived, the only one that was left to take over the kingdom. And now we're on John Hyrcanus's sons. And last week we learned about Aristobulus the first, who killed his mother by starvation and accidentally killed his brother Antigonus as well. And now we're on to the third son in this third generation, Alexander Jannaeus, or Jannaeus. And like just about all of these other people in the royal family, he had a Greek name, which is the name we typically use for him, and then he also had a Hebrew name. Jannaeus is a form, it doesn't sound like it, but it's a form of Jonathan, a variation on the same name. So there's a good chance that if you were just talking to him back then, you would call him Jonathan. He would refer to himself as Jonathan, but we call him Alexander. And his wife is Alexandra. So easy to remember, they have the same name. She just has the feminine form of it. So Alexander Jannaeus was the third son of John Hyrcanus, as I said. He became king and high priest in 103 BC. And he married Alexandra. Alexandra was already the queen. She's one of the people who plotted against the second brother, Antigonus. And she was married to Aristobulus, the oldest child. She married Alexander because Aristobulus had died childless. And like his father, John Hyrcanus, Alexander Jannaeus was a Sadducee. Remember, John converted to the Sadducees after the Pharisees offended him, suggested that, or at least one of them suggested that he wasn't qualified to be high priest because his mother allegedly had been a captive for a while with the Seleucids. So he might be part Seleucid, he might not be legitimate. So, yeah. But Alexander was also a Sadducee. And just as a reminder, the Pharisees accepted many traditions and practices that went beyond the law itself. They had all of the traditions of the elders that they followed. And the Sadducees were so opposed to those traditions, to adding anything to the law of God, that they refused to believe anything that couldn't be proved directly from the Torah, from the first 5 books of the Bible. So Alexander was obsessed with conquest and expanding Israel's borders. He was very, very often away from home, and which wasn't a really great thing for the kingdom in retrospect. He was not a great organizer of his own kingdom, but his passion was for conquest. He was always out campaigning. And during his 27-year reign, he reigned for quite a while, the Hasmonean kingdom got as big as it ever got. It reached its height in size and influence. And Alexander had a lot of significant victories. He had a lot of significant defeats as well. He had some trouble with the Egyptians. He had some trouble with the Nabateans, who lived over on the other side of the Dead Sea. They were a group of Arabs over there. We'll learn more about them later, but his greatest failures were on the home front. He was a lot less successful within his own nation than he was fighting other nations. And the trouble really, really started at the Feast of Booths one year. Would somebody like to go to Leviticus chapter 23? If someone's really willing to read that chunk for us. Leviticus 23, 39 through 43. And the Feast of Booths, or Sukkot, is a harvest festival. It's similar to Thanksgiving in a lot of ways. It was sometimes called the Feast of Ingathering. Leviticus 23, 39 through 43.
So beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the crop of the land, celebrate the festival of the Lord for 7 days. The first day is the day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day also the day of Sabbath rest. On the first day, you are to take branches from the luxuriant tree, of palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days of each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it with the 7th month. Live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. So your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them up out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
So it wasn't just about rejoicing in God's provision for that year, but remembering God's provision even back in the wilderness, the way that he had preserved them, protected them, fed them in that time. And it was one of the 3 festivals that required all Israelite men to travel to Jerusalem every year. But a lot of details to the way things are celebrated, like our holidays, we develop traditions and we just keep doing them. Like they did too. Every time they got together for this festival, one of the highlights, something that happened every day, was the water libation ceremony. And this is from a Bible dictionary that I have describing it. Each morning, a procession singing psalms and carrying tree branches and fruit went down to the pool of Siloam, and a golden flask of water was drawn. When the procession reached the water gate on the return journey, the shofar was blown. So a shofar is a trumpet made from a ram's horn. They would blow that. Near the altar, the water was poured into a bowl and wine into another. They had this ritual that they went through. And the exact significance of the water libation ceremony is debated. It had something to do almost certainly with rain. This happened right before the rainy season, or a part of it, began. And it was either a prayer for abundant rain for the crops next year, or for regulated rainfall during harvest. Because too much rain when you're trying to get crops in is a bad thing. Either way, they went through this as part of their prayer, their supplication to God. And that kind of gives a new significance, a new understanding to what Jesus does at the festival. This was kind of the focus point of their celebration. And it was an appropriate time for Jesus to offer himself to the nation as the water of life, or to offer the water of life, the Spirit, to them. Would somebody like to read those verses? First of all, John 7, verse 2 tells you when this happens.
The Feast of the Jews, Feast of Booths, for the man.
Yeah. And so that's the context. That's when Jesus said this. Then down in verses 37 through 39.
On the Wednesday, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "Many men couldn't come to drink. He who believes in me, as from his most being shall flow rivers of living water." He spoke with the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given. Jesus was not yet glorified.
So this is, I mean, on one hand, you have all of the men of Israel there. A feast of Israel is a golden opportunity for anyone who wants to make a statement to the entire nation. But Jesus is also making the festival about him, making what they're doing about him, saying, I'm the answer to your desire for water. Come to me. And that didn't go over well with the religious leaders, of course. They tried to have him arrested right after that. But the reason we're talking about this now is that, of course, the water libation ceremony is not mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament. It's not in that description of what they're supposed to do on the Feast of Booths. It's one of the many traditions preserved by the Pharisees. So if you're a Pharisee, you hold this in very high regard. You want to do this every year. You feel like you need to do this every year in order to do what God wants. If you're a Sadducee, you feel about it a little bit differently. Sadducees were a bit of cranks. Well, no, it's not in the Bible, so we're not going to do this. On one hand, you can see their point. You can understand that feeling. On the other hand, it's not how most of the people felt. And okay, so one year during the Feast of Booths, when Alexander Jannaeus was king, after the people had just finished parading through the streets, praising God as they carried the golden flask of water from the pool of Siloam, either another Sadducee priest, it's a little bit unclear what exactly happened to trigger this, but it was either another Sadducee priest or it was Alexander himself who took the flask of water and deliberately poured it on the ground or on his feet. Either way, whatever exactly was done, it started a riot. People were absolutely outraged at the disrespect shown toward their tradition, and the people responded so violently that Alexander had to have wooden barricades erected around the altar to protect himself as he worked. Remember, he was the high priest. He was offering sacrifices at this festival, and the people wanted to kill him. They shouted that he was a descendant of a captive woman and unfit to serve as priest. So that rumor kind of stuck. That was still an idea that people had, that he shouldn't be priest in the first place because his line was in question. So Alexander was deeply offended by this and reacted by ordering his Gentile mercenaries to attack the crowd. He didn't even have his own personal guard. They weren't even Jewish. He had Gentile mercenaries that worked for him, and he ordered them to attack the crowd at the festival, the unarmed people just there to offer sacrifices, and crammed into a small space as well. So the mercenaries slaughtered, according to Josephus, about 6,000 Jews at the festival. And that's probably an exaggerated number. Josephus does do that. But it shows how great a calamity the Jewish people felt this to be. The fact that it was that big in their minds, that big of a deal, what Alexander did. A lot of people did undoubtedly die. And this triggered a really bloody civil war that lasted 6 years and claimed, again, according to Josephus, another 50,000 lives. And so it was basically the Sadducees against the Pharisees. It was Alexander and his Gentile army with the Sadducees on his side, who were the minority, against the common people on the other. And Alexander was mostly winning. He achieved several victories, but he realized that the war was only weakening his kingdom. He was making himself weaker with every victory that he won against his own people. So he tried to make peace with his subjects and tried to speak calmly to them, asked why they hated him so much and what he could do to appease them. They basically responded, "You can kill yourself. That's what would make us happy at this point." Nothing short of that. So the people, the Pharisee camp, they knew that they were losing the war. And so the rebels turned in desperation to, of all people, the king of the Seleucid kingdom, the people that they had just fought and gained independence from. They went to the Seleucid king, Demetrius III, and they asked him for help. And Demetrius thought to himself, well, this is a golden opportunity, isn't it? I can use this to gain Israel back for myself, to reestablish our authority in this area. And so he agreed happily. So in the battle that followed, many Greek mercenaries fought for the Jewish king. Okay? And many Jewish rebels fought for the Greek emperor. So it was a messed up situation, and both armies tried to convince the other army to switch sides. The Jews in Alexander's army appealed to the Jews in Demetrius's army. The Greeks, following Demetrius, said to the Greeks following Alexander, "What are you doing? Come over here." Neither side were able to convince the other. And the battle was fought, and Demetrius won. Alexander was defeated. All of his mercenary army basically was destroyed. And so Alexander fled to the mountains with all that remained of his army. It looked like the Seleucids were going to take over again. But about 6,000 of the Jewish rebels, some of the people who were following Demetrius, kind of had a waking up experience. They saw the situation differently at this point. Like, here we have a victorious Seleucid king invading Israel, and our king, our Hasmonean king, is in hiding in the wilderness. He's out in the hills like Judas Maccabeus was not too long ago. And their perspective shifted completely. They said, we're not having any part in this. We're going to go and join Alexander. We're going to be loyal to our people. So they took pity on Alexander. They abandoned Demetrius and went to fight for him instead. And it wasn't all of the Jews that did this. It wasn't all the rebels. But Demetrius took it as a sign that the Jews as a whole really didn't want him there and weren't going to support him. They weren't going to help him in his war with Alexander the way that they said they would. He saw it as a betrayal. And because of this and the political situation back in Syria, a combination of things, Demetrius III abandoned his Jewish allies and returned home. So nothing too dramatic changed. Alexander and the rebels continued to fight, and Alexander defeated them again and again. Eventually, he drove the rebels into the city of Bernicelis. And if you haven't heard of Bernicelis, there's a reason for that. He destroyed it, demolished the city, and carried all of the survivors captive to Jerusalem. And what happened after that, I'm just going to read from The Jewish War by Josephus. It says, his rage, Alexander's rage, had grown so extravagant that his barbarity increased to the point of impiety. In other words, ungodliness. And he first ordered 800 of these rebels, these Pharisee rebels, to be hung upon crosses in the midst of the city. The first reference we have anywhere to somebody being crucified in Israel. And it wasn't Romans who did it, it was a Jewish king. 800 of them hung on crosses in the midst of the city. And then he had the throats of their wives and children cut before their eyes as they were hanging on the crosses. Alexander watched these executions as he was drinking and lying down with his concubines. That's kind of what you see in the picture. He's relaxing and having a good time over here, and over there, there are all of these people being crucified, tortured to death. And this shocked the people so much that 8,000 of his enemies fled away the very next night out of all Judea, and they lived as fugitives until Alexander's death. It was absolutely brutal, but it worked. The rebels, anybody who wasn't friendly to Alexander, fled the country. They were absolutely terrified. So, now remember, the queen, Alexandra, is actually sympathetic to the Pharisees. She's the daughter of a Pharisee. Imagine how she feels going through this time. But near the end of his life, Alexander contracted malaria. He got sick, and believing that hard work and exercise would cure him, he began campaigning again, fighting frequently, even in unseasonable weather, according to Josephus. So even when it was cold, even when it was wet, he would get out there and he would fight personally with his troops, thought that it would heal him. But after 3 years, Alexander died from a combination of illness, overexertion, and alcoholism at the age of 49. But before he died, here's another passage from Josephus, from the Jewish Antiquities. When the queen, Alexandra, saw that he was ready to die and had no longer any hopes of surviving, she came to him, weeping and lamenting and bewailing herself and her sons because of the desolate condition they would be left in. She said to him, "Who now will protect me and my children, who have no one to take our side? You know how much hatred your nation bears you." So, the way that people feel, it is not going to be safe for Alexandra or her children. Their line is going to be wiped out right now if Alexander dies and there's no one to protect them. But Alexander gave her the following advice: that she should conceal his death from the soldiers until she was away, not let anybody know that he had died until she was well away from the camp, and that she should go in triumph, as if in victory, to Jerusalem, and put some of her authority into the hands of the Pharisees, so that they would speak well of her and reconcile the nation to her. So put the Pharisees in charge, give them authority, so that they can influence the people in your favor. "This is what you should do," he said. "When you have come to Jerusalem, send for the leading men among the Pharisees, and show them my body, and with great appearance of sincerity, give them leave to use it as they themselves please, whether they will dishonor my body by refusing it burial, or whether they will do injury to it in their anger." So, say, this is the body of Alexander. However you want to treat it, you can treat it. You can desecrate it however you want, in vengeance for what he did to you. "Promise them also," Alexander told her, "that you will do nothing without them in the affairs of the kingdom, that you'll always consult the Pharisees in everything you do. If you do this, then I shall have a more glorious funeral from them than you could have given me, and you will rule in safety. Make peace with the people. And it makes you wonder where some of that wisdom was before he got to this point. But his plan worked. Alexandra obeyed his instructions and was established as queen. And we will learn about her reign next week. Alexander was probably the most hated Jewish ruler, the most hated of the Hasmoneans to rule ever. Alexandra was the most beloved ruler that they ever had. And like I said, we'll learn about her next week. That's all I have for today. Any questions?
Well, love her. Her politicians to give them food.
Well, she was, they felt like she was on their side, that she was a victim as well. She'd always kind of been loyal to the Pharisees, never really approved of what Alexander did. Yeah, the Pharisees were the larger group. The Pharisees had the ear of the people. The people listened to them. They were the teachers. And yeah, they basically represented the majority of what Judaism was, how people thought and lived, even after what Alexander had done.
Hasn't changed
Well,
political people.
yeah, people naturally divide into parties, into groups. And yeah, it's never quite as black and white as it seems either. There's a lot of complexity that goes on. It's a different culture, but it's not a different world back then. So, anything else?
Well, why is the piece of foods also have deciding?
Yeah, it's just a version difference. Yeah, it's yeah, the Hebrew isn't a language with a whole lot of words, and the same word gets used for a lot of different things. So depending on the context, um, tabernacle just means tent. Pretty similar to a booth that you would make out of sticks and branches, leaves and things. So, yep, just a translation thing. But there is a kind of connection there because in the wilderness, God lived in a tent like they did. They lived in temporary shelters, and so did God with them. They had their tents, and he had his tent. So, yeah, looking back, remembering that time before they had moved into the land, before they had settled down and made permanent dwellings. All right, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Father, thank you for the examples of those who came before. Thank you for the just reading through Proverbs, the wisdom that you have, the way that it really does reflect how the world works. And human nature is the same today as it always was. Help us to be wise in how we deal with people who disagree with us. Help us to be kind even in disagreements. Help us to behave like you, to behave like Christ, to stand up and speak out against evil when we see it, but to do so because we're motivated by love. We're motivated by concern for the people those lies affect. And help us to show that love to each other and to everyone that we meet this week. and give us a good New Year's celebration and a good time this morning in church as well, as we seek to please you in every aspect of everything we do. In Jesus' name, amen.